Hi, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hello, hello.
Just waiting for two more members.
Okay. For this meeting, who are the members? Ellen?
Kira, Ellen, Dina Becton, Tamisha, Michael Pearson, Cheryl, yourself. And we do have Bisa on here as well.
Okay. Melvin, I feel like I haven't seen you in such a long time. How you doing?
Doing well. It has been. It's been a minute. As we
Yeah.
get closer to Thanksgiving and Christmas and the holidays and another year, which I
I
can't.
know.
Talking about it yesterday, I can't remember 19 or 20. So yes. It's good to
Yeah,
see.
the years have smushed together for me. I'm all off on when things happen. I'm like, did that happen 2019? Yeah.
Yep. It was funny because our secretary came to me and said, or Norma came to me and said, hey, did Rick Wagner, he's still in our computer system. And I'm like, he's been gone and I couldn't remember. I was like, he's retired for years, but he came back as a retiree. And so, yes, I don't know what year folks have been with us when they left.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting to think that maybe I'm getting old and crazy, but I hope not.
All right. So I think we have quorum now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Tamisha. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Stephanie.
All right. So we are going to dive right on in. And just start off with our welcome and introductions. Welcome, everyone, to our Racial Justice Oversight Body Diversion Committee. And if we could do a roll call of folks, that would be great, Nicole.
Kira? Hello. Ellen?
Hi, here. Good afternoon.
Tamisha?
Present.
Michael?
Good afternoon, everyone.
And Stephanie.
That was it, right?
That's
Yes,
all the members that we have right now. Mhm.
All right. And since we
I have
do
a phone number that I don't recognize, that someone's on the call. I don't know if that's a member or not, but if you are, did you want to?
Yeah, and let's just, since it is such a small group, if the folks in the public could just introduce yourselves, starting with Patrice.
Hi, good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. I wasn't sure what time of the day it was. I'm Patrice Guillory. I'm with Office of Reentry and Justice. Hey, everyone.
Thanks, Patrice. Jill.
Hi there, Jill Ray, Office of Supervisor Candace Anderson.
Thank you. And then we have a caller on the phone. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon. This is Alicia Knuckles with Office of Diane Burgess. I'm just having some technical issues with my camera, so I'm calling in momentarily.
Okay, thank you so much. And Aday, we're just doing introductions. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Aday Chagar. I am Community Engagement Organizer with Safe Return.
Thank you, Aday, and welcome. And Erin, we're doing introductions. If you would like to introduce yourself.
My name is Aaron. I'm with the Safe Return Project.
Thank you. Welcome, Erin. And before we get into the remaining agenda, are there any announcements anyone has? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. The Public Defender's Office Clean Slate Unit is going to have an event in conjunction with the Reentry Success Center on November 6th in Richmond. We have a flyer and some promotional materials that should be getting sent around soon.
Okay, cool, great. Is there a way we can just send it out to the listserv or?
Sure,
Nicole,
I
is that
can,
something that you could do? I don't know.
I can. Sure.
Okay. Thank you. And now we'll move on to our public comment, and this can be any item that is not on our current agenda. So I'll open it up for public comment now. And seeing no public comments, we will move on to the rest of our agenda. Next up, we have approval of our record of action from September 16th. And it's attachment 1. So has everyone had a chance to review it? And if there are any corrections that need to be made to that record of action, please let us know. Any comments from the committee? Any comments from the public on the record of action? All right. Could we get a motion to approve the record of action?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Thanks, Michael. And a second?
I'll second.
Second.
I don't know if that was Tamisha or Kira.
Oh, I got.
It was
Tamisha,
both.
but- Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Can we do a roll call vote, please, Nicole?
Kira,
Aye.
Ellen,
Aye.
Tamisha,
Aye.
Michael,
Aye.
Stephanie.
Abstain.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And thank you, Chris, for facilitating the meeting the last time when I was not here. Appreciate that.
No problem.
All right, motion carries. And now we're going to move into our next agenda item, which is the review of LEAD Plus and eligibility criteria for potential adoption, inclusion in our guidelines. And I believe Patrice and Ellen are going to be walking us through this.
Before you guys get started, if you don't mind, just a little bit of context so that, you know, we can sort of make sure everybody's on the same page about why we're looking at this. It's really quite related to the agenda item that comes right after, right? So when we started to talk about the diversion guidelines, right? And what diversion could look like in the county, you know, going forward, as opposed to what it looks like now, and started looking at the language that we had, questions started arising as far as, and you'll see this in the, if and when we get to the later agenda item, right, about having an independent, you know, group to look at eligibility criteria and to make sure that they are, you know, based in equitable practices, that they ensure equitable outcomes in terms of who gets the opportunity to participate in diversion as opposed to being in the system. And as that conversation around eligibility criteria arose, it was brought to our attention, I think, by Ellen in particular, right, that all of this work had been done in terms of LEAD Plus and the development of eligibility criteria there, and that at least to some degree, right, if this group wanted to take on the development of or sort of vetting some eligibility criteria, that it could possibly be done without reinventing the wheel, or at least, you know, not completely, right? Like that there was a lot of work that had been done on this particular project, and that work could be potentially incorporated into, you know, what this group may feel is the right way to sort of move this process of thinking about or rethinking diversion forward. So wanted to make sure that we, you know, gave, and obviously in looking at the document, there are a lot of pages to it. There's a lot of information, I'm sure a lot of context as to why certain criteria were developed and what the, you know, conversations and discussions were and all that sort of information. And so just wanted to leave room before we even get into revisiting sort of the working draft of guidelines to talk about what work had been done, why it was done, what the context for that is, and to what extent that could be incorporated into sort of the shared vision of diversion that we're trying to cultivate here. So that's why it's on the agenda, particularly for those of you who may not have been able to attend last month's meeting. And I will turn it over to either or both Patrice and Ellen to walk us through it.
Okay, Ellen, how do you want to do this? I can kind of give a brief overview and then, will that work? Okay, so I do want to say that I was able to participate in the COCO Lead Plus project, which I believe started in, gosh, was that 2016, 2017, somewhere around there? 2017, yeah. And it was a BSCC funded grant through Prop $47, okay? So it was a state project that was led by the Behavioral Health Unit from Contra Costa Health Services in partnership with the Antioch Police Department. And my involvement, my professional involvement in that project was at the time I was working for a service provider, Health Right 360, which was the primary CBO entity that then hired a lot of the program staff and eventually subcontracted with other CBOs to bring on a range of resources there. And we adopted the LEAD model, which is the law enforcement assisted diversion model, which is widely known across the country, started out in Seattle, and it was our opportunity to apply that same diversion effort in the city of Antioch specifically. And so the intent behind it was to identify folks who were repeatedly arrested on misdemeanor charges, as well as some low-level felonies, the wobbler sort of terminology. There are those wobbler charges and other offenses that were explicitly called out in Prop 47. So, and those who were repeatedly arrested on those charges are folks who we've been able to identify have that the underlying cause for that particular offense is behavioral health related. So I don't know if maybe Nicole, you can share screen, or am I allowed to share screen? I wanted to pull up the agenda packet. If we can go to maybe page 51 in the agenda. So the attachment here is the actual interim evaluation report that was put together by Urban Institute, who was our third-party evaluator on this project. And what I'm showing here is there are a couple of appendices in this report that I wanted to call out so you guys can get a good picture of view, not only of this project, but how we got to the eligibility criteria. So this is the program logic model. And there was a lot of feedback and input put into not only the structure of the project itself, but then also the policies and the protocols that would govern the program. And so there were a number of decision-making committees. There's the local advisory council, which a few folks on this call, I think, were members of that. I think, Tamisha, you were a member of the LAC. And it was essentially the steering committee for the entire project. And then there was the policy council, which involved some of the program partners that are listed here in this first column of inputs. And the policy council actually helped to shape a number of the program's protocols, but namely the eligibility criteria. And within that policy council was a separate law enforcement, I think we called it either law enforcement or justice sort of work group that really spent hours deliberating on what are the specific charges we want to look at to divert, and then also what is the actual diversion process. So we'll get into that in just a bit. But then you see on column 6, what were some of the outcomes that we were looking to have. A good chunk of this work was to focus on the front end or the upstream, right, of the criminal justice system, and really helping to support our Antioch police officers in giving them more tools in their toolbox to identify individuals who are in more critical need of resources and support rather than arresting them and sending deferring their case over to the district attorney's office. If you can scroll down to, and Ellen, at any point if I'm missing something, feel free to jump in. Maybe go to page 54. So this is the actual eligibility criteria here. It's not only the charges that we've determined that are divertible, but then also what would exclude someone from being qualified, from being diverted, and then the review process for that. So I'll just try to go through, I don't know how much time we have. I'm gonna try to go through this as quickly as possible. So if you haven't had a chance to read through this prior to the meeting, hopefully this will help. So at the time of referral, which really means that at the time of arrest, and in this project's case, a lot of the referrals took place at the point of arrest or consider social contact. So prior to someone being arrested, but maybe the officer is familiar with the individual in the community. They've arrested them many, many times before. And so instead, it would be best to just connect them directly with program staff than to wait for them to commit another offense to then arrest them, right? So that was usually the point of the referral. The individual had to be 18 years or older, so this did not involve juveniles. They had to be arrested by Antioch Police Department and have had to be arrested on an eligible offense within the last 12 months. And in the case of social contact referrals or probation referrals, they still have had to been arrested on eligible offense by APD within the last at least twice within the past 12 months. And the reason why this was so important was because we really wanted to maintain some sort of a boundary around who from, we wanted to be sure that we were clear that the individuals that were eligible had in fact had some interaction with Antioch Police Department specifically, because they are the primary referring agency. Okay. Scroll down a little bit, Nicole. Let's see here. The individual had to have had 1.3 here, 1.31 and 1.32. Individuals' history of criminal justice involvement must be related to behavioral health disorders, either based on self-report or there's been some documented history. And I can talk a little bit later about how we figure that out. And then individual does not currently meet criteria for 5150 psychiatric hold. Let's see, I want to call out that for 1.5, any person who's under supervision by the county's probation department and who is arrested by Antioch Police Department on a new charge or has committed a technical violation is not excluded from eligibility solely because they are on probation. Okay, so we want to call that out to ensure that we are still, that the project not only worked with the Antioch Police Department, but also with probation, especially if anyone that was eligible was also under supervision. So that coordination needed to take place. 1.6, if an individual's eligibility is in question, the referring source should complete and submit to the client information coordinator, which was a program staff person that was hired by Health Right 360, could request for secondary review by the diversion panel. So let me pause here. There are those who were referred directly into the program by Antioch Police Department, and then there were those that were referred whose eligibility was in question, and therefore a secondary review was called, and then a diversion panel was assembled. The diversion panel was made up primarily of the individuals who actually created this, or the partners that created this eligibility criteria, as well as program staff who were familiar, or there was some familiarity with the individual. Okay, and we'll talk about that process too. If an individual does not meet the criteria for Cocoa Lead Plus after eligibility screening, the officer will provide an information card to the individual outlining alternative community resources. So when an officer is referring someone into the project, and I'll get to it in just a second, there is an administrative review that's happening that's looking at whether this person's background, their history, the charges that they were arrested on, the circumstances around their arrest to then determine their eligibility. This was a officer that was actually it was a retired lieutenant that was that came back to Antioch PD, hired through a contract to serve as the diversion officer for this project. That person did the administrative review. And we'll get into that in just a minute too. So forgive me if I'm jumping around, but this is how I'm recalling the process here. There's the exclusionary criteria. So this is if this is found in the person's history, this would automatically exclude them from being referred directly into the program. There's some exclusionary convictions. So first-degree murder, second-degree murder, felony manslaughter, felony sex offenses, kidnapping, felony assault with great bodily harm, and human trafficking. If during the screening process for an individual who is otherwise eligible, it is discovered that the individual has been convicted of any of the exclusionary convictions listed in section 2.2, and if the exclusionary conviction occurred more than 60 months prior to the date of referral, the referral will be forwarded to the diversion panel. So even though there is exclusionary criteria, we still wanted to keep the door open as much as possible to review the potential participants' full background and ensure that there was discussion around whether or not this individual should be referred into the program and have access to resources. So yes, there's exclusionary criteria, but there is still a process for dialogue to make a final determination. Lastly, in 2.4, if an individual who is otherwise eligible is found to be on parole, the referral will be forwarded to the diversion panel for secondary review to include a request for an opinion, excuse me, from a representative from state parole. I feel like I should pause really quickly because I know that was a lot. 80 questions so far. Or Ellen, is there anything you wanted to?
Patrice, you may have mentioned it, but I think I may have missed it, but who makes up the diversion panel?
Yeah, so the diversion panel was actually made up of the district attorney's office, public defender, the diversion officer from Antioch Police Department. It did include a representative from Behavioral Health Division and Health, right? Were we there? I couldn't recall. I think the client information coordinator was also part of that.
I think probation was there as well.
The probation too. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was your diversion panel.
Okay, thank you.
I think just for context, there was there were a lot of stakeholders, really the criminal justice system, team that was working through the criteria. And I think it was a lengthy and thoughtful and, at times, I'm not going to say heated, but spirited conversation about what we wanted to see in terms of diversion. And I think that we arrived at some criteria that are relatively limited. It doesn't mean, this would be the be all and end all of future efforts, but I think there was a lot of conversation around the intention, which was to allow the most individuals that we could to participate in COCO Lead Plus and to be referred by the Antioch Police Department officers. So, again, the national model of law enforcement assisted diversion is really looking almost at lower level cases, and the way that when we wrote this grant and sent it to the BSCC, there was an effort to kind of distinguish this lead program a bit through the plus language, is because we went up in terms of charges that could potentially be diverted to those, as Patrice mentioned earlier, that were wobblers or slightly more serious that could be charged as felonies. So that was a piece of it that I think was important in the design of who could be considered for diversion. And then these criteria that Patrice is walking us through are really folks that would then not be eligible based on these prior convictions. And there were initially conversations, maybe even an arrest for a serious crime should be enough. And then, of course, we landed on there having to have been a conviction for one of the few more serious charges, that it had to be a conviction within a very succinct period of time, 5 years, and that, sort of really whittling that list down. So I don't, that's not to say there couldn't be efforts to further expand, but that was kind of the process and the conversation. And it did take, I think, several meetings and conversations to really reach a consensus.
Thank you, Ellen. So I won't go through too much of number 3 and number 4. Number 3 is the secondary review. What constitute a secondary review or indicated a need for a secondary review, required finding prior convictions that fell under that category of exclusionary offenses that occurred more than 5 years. Prior convictions of felony assaults, again, within 5 years. And then any criminal offenses that we have marked as review for discretion. And that's in our listing of the eligible charges that could be used to divert someone. And then on occasions where the individual has any holds or warrants from any other jurisdiction, that case could be referred to the diversion panel. And that's actually what happened in most cases. I don't know if you would agree, Ellen, that most of the cases that were sent over to the diversion panel was because an individual was actually eligible in all other situations, but they had new open cases in other jurisdictions. So, a lot of work had to be done on the diversion officer side of contacting some of those jurisdictions to see, so those neighboring police departments, to talk to them about our program and let them know that we would like to support them and have them access resources, but needing a little bit more information about what is surrounding the individual's other cases in those other jurisdictions. Referring agencies, namely the Antioch Police Department and the Probation Department, though we didn't receive a lot directly from probation. It's mostly from the Antioch's diversion officer. Okay, let's scroll down to, actually, we can scroll a little bit more. Let's go past all of that. I want to get right down to the eligible charges, because I'm sure that's what you guys are interested in. The preceding sections speak about the review process, and the Antioch PD diversion officer actually had a checklist that he would use to do the administrative review. And then for those that were eligible, contacted Health Right 360 to let us, at the time, to let us know that the person is eligible, and asked that program staff be sent out to contact that person and start the enrollment process. Enrollment actually marked the person now being, what's the word, diverted, I guess, or maybe the start of the diversion process. So the goal here with the program is that if the individual actually enrolled in the program, then that would mean that once that enrollment process was complete, program staff would notify Antioch PD, and then they would not submit that charge over, they would not refer that charge over to the district attorney's office. And then in their recording to, DOJ, it would simply say detention only or dismiss of charges, something to that effect. So that way, in the back end on that person's history with Department of Justice, there is that arrest charge is not showing up. Okay, if we can scroll down, yeah, here we go. Sorry. Scroll just a little bit more, Nicole. I'm sorry, up, down. So prior to this part. Okay, right here. So we're getting into what the actual charges are that were divertible. A couple of notes here on 7.1.1. Any offense marked by reviewer discretion would be basically called or referred to the diversion panel for final determination of that participant or that individual's eligibility. In this listing, any offense marked with the asterisk is lead eligible only where circumstances indicate that the sale or transfer was intended to provide a substances, am I saying that right? Living, or to allow the person to obtain or forward drugs for his or her own consumption. So we'll see in just a minute a lot of charges that are related to possession. But the idea is that those were divertible in the sense that this person is possibly selling or is in possession, not only just for their because of their own addiction, but then they're also selling in the case of gaining income to support themselves. Hopefully that came out clear. And then 7.1.3, in any case where a citizen's arrest is involved against a person, the arrested individual that is eligible for referral if the arresting citizen no longer desires prosecution. And I want to say we may have had 1 or 2 times that there was a citizen's arrest that was involved, and our diversion officer was really great of connecting with the other party and negotiating with them essentially to have this individual then referred to the program. Okay, scroll down some more. So 7.2 is a listing of some of the drug-related crimes. As you can see, it's mostly possession and then possession for the intent to sell or transport. Then we have some crimes against public peace. There was also some theft-related crimes here, so petty theft and a little bit of property theft here. Scroll down some more. Some miscellaneous offenses as well, disorderly conduct, crimes involving persons, crimes involving police officers, and then some vehicle code sections. So this was actually a mix of, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellen, this was a mix of not only various penal codes, but then also city-related violations that we felt, or that Antioch PD would like to have seen a part of this this criteria. They were aware of individuals that they're arresting on a I shouldn't say on a regular basis, but quite often because of these certain citations, and so wanted to ensure that they had connections to resources as well. If you go down to maybe page 61, this is the diagram of the case flow process. And if you could see at the top on the left-hand side where it says in field, and then right under that, that says in field and in custody. This is the pathway predominantly that we saw within this project. So your social contact referrals, and then your cite and release. And so you can follow the chain here. I'll point out mostly the cite and release as a good example. It's AP officer initiated, the officer writes an arrest report. So usually the individual is just cited in the field and released on their way. An arrest report is done, It is then sent to the diversion officer for this program. He does his administrative review and determines eligibility. If the person was ineligible, they went through the traditional criminal justice process, which means their charge gets referred over to the district attorney's office. If they are deemed eligible, then a lieutenant within the police department approves the referral, creates a referral form, and then it is sent over to program staff, who then reaches out to the individual, asks them if they're interested in participating in the program, because if they are, this particular charge that they were picked up on recently goes away. And if they say yes, then there's this whole other process of doing an intake with them, conducting a screening, creating an action plan, and eventually referring them over to services. So I think I want to stop there. There's a lot of information, but I think it's really helpful, particularly for this committee, if you're looking at not only diversion eligible charges, but then the process by which we make diversion actually happen. So I'm open to any questions, or Ellen, if there's anything else you wanted to fill in. I'll take a step back.
I had a quick question on, after the officer asked about the interest and the police report goes to the diversion officer, is that an automatic thing, or is it just at the officer's discretion whether it goes to the diversion officer?
So that was the original intent. Unfortunately, we didn't get very far because not a lot of training was done with the actual beat officers. So what ended up happening was that the diversion officer would just review the arrest reports of the prior week or the prior weekend to identify anyone that was arrested on those eligible charges, and then start the work from there. So actually, the conversation with the individual about the program and the benefits of it didn't happen until after a program staff person was notified that, hey, this person is eligible. This is their contact information based on the arrest report. Seek them out. So a lot of times there was a lot of cold calling and conversation happening with the individual because that front work of having the officer do some of that interaction around the program just didn't end up happening.
Was part of the program to have that training and it just didn't happen, or is that something that you all didn't account for?
Yeah, no, it was definitely part of the program to have training done with the police officers. Unfortunately, I'll say this, that we had some challenges around program coordination for this entire project. As you can imagine, it is very, as you can see, it's very complex and had a lot of different elements and moving pieces to it that unfortunately that side of the work just didn't pan out in the way that it was intended.
Mm-hmm. And this was only in Antioch, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And I would say a few other features that I think are really unique and positive about the lead model are, really embracing harm reduction principles in its sort of true form, in the form that, Seattle is doing it. That's, they've been doing it for years and years. So they've been able to really develop a culture of having these kinds of services and outreach come directly from law enforcement to community members. And part of it, though, is establishing for folks that are in need that these services exist, and that there is a support network, and then, maybe conducting the intake and allowing that case to be diverted. And some percentage of the individuals will then engage in the services and sort of go that route. There are other individuals who maybe aren't ready to do a more robust engagement at that point, but then are aware that the services are there and return months later when they're in need to engage with those services. So the lead model is really for folks that are high utilizers of the system and end up often having multiple, contacts with hospitals or law enforcement or other systems, and to provide them with a supportive network that will be in place when they're kind of meeting with them where they are and offering a broad array of services. When I first heard from the Seattle team, they said, sometimes people need socks, sometimes they need food, sometimes people are ready to look into resources for housing. At other points, we're able to stabilize folks in treatment. So it is kind of leveraging a really broad array of services in the best of worlds. And I think what we found here in Contra Costa was that a huge percentage of individuals that participated in COCO Lead Plus were unhoused and had some very significant mental health challenges and other challenges. And so it took really a coalition of different service providers and approaches to work with the COCO Lead Plus participants. But I think this is a group that our office is working with right now in our holistic intervention partnership, which is also BSCC funded. And I know we've had a lot of collaborative efforts throughout the county to try to address similar issues to what COCO Lead Plus was designed to address.
Thank you all. Any other questions or comments from committee members?
I have a few. Sorry, I just I see Tamisha's hand, and I'll defer since she's a member.
Thank you for the presentation. So I noted the initiative in Antioch had a sister city, I guess it was Richmond, where there was supposed to be some work done around Antioch like having the program and Richmond not having the program, and then looking at the results afterwards, like if one city did better around arrests, reducing arrests and tying to services, if the city who didn't get to have the program versus the city who did have a program, and what was the outcome? Did you all see a significant difference?
Yeah, so unfortunately, so yes, Richmond PD was essentially the control group for the evaluation to see if, to compare whether or not those who were diverted from Antioch PD and accessing resources, if with a separate or similar size police department, and then the jurisdiction having similar characteristics, if there was any, if the intervention itself made any major difference. Unfortunately, we were not able to get that far because the BSCC pulled our grant within, I would say we had a year left to go. And this was in the middle of COVID, the height of COVID actually. So we didn't even get to a point where we were able to do a final evaluation. Part of that evaluation was also going to include a cost benefit analysis as well. So a lot of that information just didn't end up coming to fruition for us to have some of those questions answered, unfortunately.
And I don't remember this in the presentation, but maybe I missed it. Did you mention why the BSCC didn't continue to fund another project?
Yeah, no, I didn't mention in this presentation, but I can tell you that part of it was that there was a commitment between the Housing Authority and Behavioral Health Division to ensure that's part of our housing component, that there is not only transitional housing, but then that individuals will transition over to accessing some housing vouchers. So there was a set aside of about 50 housing vouchers, which you can imagine is upwards to about $1 million or so that is, we're basically saying to the state that we can match to the project. At that point, HUD was in a bit of a deficit, and therefore those vouchers did not materialize. And it was very, very difficult to identify other ways or other housing opportunities to sort of make up for that shortfall. So ultimately, then you had COVID happened. And at that time, I'm sure everyone was anticipating such a major dip in the economy. And so the SCC felt that at that point, it was important to just kind of pull the plug and bring the project to an end. But luckily, at least the individuals that were receiving resources, we were able to transition them over to other providers in the community so that service disruption didn't happen for them. And for those who did have housing, we were able to shift them over to other housing programs that they were qualified for. So that was at least the good thing, that clients were not sort of put out as a result of that decision being made. But it really was quite disheartening because there was still so much to learn from this. The design of it was just incredibly well done. And I think all of the feedback and input from all the stakeholders, it was very sophisticated. I feel like it was probably the most robust collaborative partnership I had ever been a part of. And I've been, part of the reentry work now for quite some time in the county. And I was quite sad to see that it kind of came to an end. But there's a lot of lessons even in just the structure and the design of it that I think we can glean from. Maybe not to this extent, right? But I certainly think that there's something that can be, there are elements of it that can certainly be replicable for other programs or other diversion efforts that we seek to bring forward.
Thank you. And my last question is, even though the program was no longer funded, but had been operating in the city for a while, are there remnants of the diversion program that are still being utilized by the Antioch PD that you're aware of, or anything that actually stuck, or did everything kind of come to a halt after the funding went away?
Yeah, I would say at least on the Antioch Police Department side, I can't speak to it very directly. I do know that the diversion officer at the time, who was very involved and very engaged, and also led at least about 1 or 2 trainings that happened with Antioch Police Department, Antioch police officers, he's no longer there. He was on contract to begin with, so he's no longer there at the department, and I'm not quite sure what institutional knowledge was passed on there at the department. And then in terms of any programming that's happening in the community as a result of this project, there's some elements of it, but not necessarily with the same exact providers. We brought in Community Works West to do some restorative justice circles. Though they would love to come back into East County, they're not there at this time. Hope Solutions, who was the housing provider, they're doing more housing work and have actually expanded their sort of service area to now focus a lot more on reentry participants or folks who are coming back into the community. So that was a good thing. I want to say Cocoa Lead Plus was probably their first reentry or justice related project that they had been a part of. Let's see, who else? Health Rights 360 is still there and is still providing resources through their reentry network project. And I feel like I'm missing one more. Oh, and then Bay Area Community Resources continues to work out in Antioch, though not necessarily with this adult population, because they're more so focused on the youth side of things. They continue to operate as they have similarly with Cocoa Lead Plus.
Thank you.
Chris?
Thanks. Yeah, I was getting to it. Just wanted to, make sure I'm deferential, man. I'm not on the committee, so I want to make sure you guys all get your chances to ask your questions. But starting with sort of the diversion panel, I'm curious if there were any thoughts around perhaps having more of a more representation from community, whether that's community-based organizations, whether that's individuals, and particularly formerly incarcerated persons. I know you said that I think Health Right would have had a seat on the panel. I'm curious if there were any talks of expanding, sort of, it sounded like a lot of justice system players were at the table there. So I'm curious if there was any conversation around the composition of the panel.
Yeah, I would say earlier on when this was being developed, there was definitely conversation around that, especially if there was a reason to bring a case forward regarding an individual that had already been accessing services. So let's say a diversion, a COCO lead plus participant who was already enrolled from a, and had a prior charge diverted to participate in the program, right? And have been actively engaged, but let's say that person picked up a new charge, right? Is there, and if they've been involved in the program, have been accessing resources, have been really, participating well, and program staff, as well as the other CBOs that may have been working with them, if that individual is showing a lot of promise, right? Is there a room to call in those folks as well to make a case for why this person's new charge now should be diverted? So those conversations did happen earlier on. I'll tell you that when it actually came to practice, the diversion panel was primarily used to determine eligibility. So those situations didn't even happen. And I would say, in my personal opinion, having Health Right at the table, as well as behavioral health at the table, was quite sufficient outside of the justice partners, because all the justice partners, to a degree, all agreed to divert. There was rarely anyone that was excluded. So yeah, I felt it was enough. I felt all of the justice partners were also very well versed in the program itself and the services that were provided, where I feel as though that there was enough openness, I would say, to ensure that anyone that's coming to any case that's being referred to the diversion panel, we want to strive as much as possible to ensure that there is an opening and opportunity for them to access the program's resources. And now, I didn't participate in a lot of those panel discussions, but Ellen, I know you have, and curious as your take on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with your framing. I think one piece of it that's important to note is that by the time a case got to the diversion panel, the officer assigned from Antioch PD had basically looked at the case and kind of vetted it on his end and decided it was someone that Antioch PD was interested in diverting. So really at that point, the other stakeholders and members of the committee were kind of working through, which eligibility rules we might need to look at and what this touched on. And I don't remember, I actually remember only one case where the individual was not, in fact, diverted after going to the panel. But I think by and large, the panel was really to kind of approve the cases that were being brought through by Antioch PD that they were interested in diverting together with the collaborative.
Okay, really quick follow-up to that. When you say the officer, you mean the diversion officer that you guys have mentioned before, or you mean the arresting officer?
The diversion officer.
Okay. Were there any requirements about how or when the panel would meet? Say, so if there's a case that's, in limbo, is there like a turnaround time that might make it difficult, say, for, first of all, to be clear, I hear what you're saying, and I think it makes sense, the way that you had it structured, but I'm thinking in the event that there was an interest for this body, or particularly for community folks who may, hear about this process and want, some level of representation. I'm curious if there was say within a week or two, we have to meet and we have to come to a decision, which could mean that folks who may not usually be in a 9-to-5 setting or whatever, have to try to fit it within their schedules, and if that could get logistically problematic, or if it's something that we could potentially work out depending on how folks feel. So was there a requirement there in terms of how soon the panel would need to meet to discuss any particular case?
I don't remember the exact requirement. I would say in general, we turned them around very quickly, and that would sort of look like an email from the diversion officer from Antioch Police Department to the individuals from each of the offices or departments or entities saying, we have a case to discuss, and we might sometimes just jump on. I think it was pre-Zoom that we were doing this, so we might just jump on a 15-minute conference call to discuss the case, or often we had meetings in place and we're able to tag these discussions into our regular meetings. But I do think it's something that ideally, if you're going to have a law enforcement diversion model, it really, the turnaround is important, because I know on Patrice's end and on the service provision end, you just lose people really quickly, especially folks that are transient or unhoused. And it becomes very hard to then really execute your mission and provide services if you can't find people.
Yeah, that's right. Initially, it was kind of on an ad hoc basis. And then if you can recall, in one of the documents here that I show, one of the other committees that was formed was the Operations Committee. And it's really to be Operations/Diversion Panel Committee. And so the Operations Committee actually had a standing meeting time. I want to say if it wasn't monthly, it was every maybe bi-weekly, every 2 weeks. And so we would tag on the diversion panel to schedule time for diversion panel either before or after that meeting, because a lot of those folks would want to be at the ops meeting anyway. But there is a lot of, I will say there was definitely a lot of bottleneck when it came to the referrals, whether it's through the diversion panel or just the regular process to just approve someone through the through the diversion officer. And a good chunk of that was because of the amount of time it took to do the administrative review. If you're looking to apply something similar, I would say either have be a little bit looser on the administrative review side of things. Look at where you could have some flexibility, so things could be, you can kind of clear the path a little bit more quickly, or have additional officers to do sort of that administrative review. What I liked about having the diversion officer is that, and this was actually suggested by one of the captains at the time, one of the AP's captains at the time of when the grant was being developed, was that having a diversion officer that's actually not involved in the arresting provides a limitation on bias. So the person is looking strictly at just the information that's in front of them to determine eligibility. So I thought that was an interesting component to this. In addition to allowing the arresting officers ability to say, hey, we want to refer this person into the program.
Could you repeat really quickly when you talk about maybe the looser requirements on the administrative review, like where you thought that loosening could happen? I mean, I heard you say it, I just wasn't writing fast enough. So.
I just simply said I didn't have anything specific in terms of specific policy around this or specific elements of this criteria where there could be some loosening of the administrative review. I would say, for example, just speaking on, now mind you, I don't come from a law enforcement background, I come from a service provision background. So on that side of the fence, I felt as though if an individual had multiple charges or open cases elsewhere in other jurisdictions, that shouldn't preclude their eligibility into this program. Whether they get picked up and arrested on that charge elsewhere, then we deal with it as we deal with it. But that shouldn't hold up someone's eligibility to access resources when they're already out in the community. So I would say on the service provider side, we were okay with it. We deal with that anyway when we're working in the reentry space already with a lot of the AB 109 work that we're doing. And so that would take time because the officer would actually call those various jurisdictions to get more information on those open cases. So anytime that person, the officer had to confer with other agencies, definitely took up time to finalize the eligibility. Let me see, I'm just trying to look at the review process right now. I'd also say that with on the social contact side of things, I'm trying to remember, there were so many changes as we were implementing this. The original idea or the original design was that the social contact referrals will come from Antioch officers, right? So that all beat officers will be trained up and we'll provide them with like these cards. Early Rep has these cards, so we created similar cards. We stole their idea. The officers will carry them so that way when they're citing someone, they can give them the information about the program and leave it to the person to reach out to us and then send that information also over to the diversion officer to say, hey, I gave this card to this person. I think they should be referred into the program. That element of it didn't happen, as I mentioned earlier, because of some of the trainings that didn't take place, right? At least on that particular protocol. So what happened was that we expanded social contact referrals to now come from program staff that as they're going out there locating those that are eligible, that have been deemed eligible. A lot of times these folks were chronically homeless, so they're in encampments, they're all over the place. So they're really hitting the ground. And as they're finding these individuals and talking with them, there are others that are overhearing what resources are available. And so they're like, oh, well, I've been arrested before. Am I eligible? You know? And so that kind of dynamic happened. And so it was like, well, we see these people as we're out in the street, and this is coming from program staff. Why can't we also refer them in? Can't our diversion officer do a quick background check to see, just at a high level, will they actually be eligible for the program? So there was that too, as well as behavioral health having its on the forensic side of things, having their sort of set of folks that they were familiar with, wanting to get access to the resources too. So there was some expansion of that then also complicated a little bit of the review process. So, so yeah, I hope I answered your question. I can't give, because I'm not a law enforcement person totally, like, you know, to give sort of the background on the actual charges of which or how that review process should be augmented a little bit. But those were some factors that played a role in the bottlenecking.
And I saw Ellen had come off mute when you were talking about some of the loosening of the protocol. So Ellen, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just more of a process comment that, you know, because this is a program that really started, it starts with a law enforcement agency. That process is really was the diversion officer using tools at his disposal, right? So running a criminal background history on folks that are potential participants, and then from that gleaning kind of what Patrice was talking about. Oh, maybe there's a case in another city in Contra Costa, maybe the individual has something in another county, and then kind of discussing those cases sometimes with other law enforcement agencies, or at least flagging them to try to identify if there's participation. And so I don't think having that deep level of investigation into where someone sits in terms of all of their potential cases is would work unless the model is a model that starts with a law enforcement agency, because otherwise there's not going to be access to run folks, you know, in terms of their criminal background. So I know other programs and efforts don't necessarily revolve around that deeper level of vetting of an individual's prior history, just in order to start the service provision piece.
And if I could add one more thing, I do recall that for APD, that deep level of review is really important for them, because of whatever protocols or policies that they have in conjunction with how they work with the district attorney's office. So the DA was certainly very much, or the DA's office was very important to this piece. At the time, it was Venus Johnson who was involved in the diversion panel from the DA's office, and was able to talk to the different units within their office. I believe the misdemeanor unit, there's some attorneys there, what have you. So anything that was at any point a question mark for them, they were able to do their own sort of review and then come back and determine, yeah, this person is fine for diversion.
All right, I appreciate that. I have a few more of these. Try to get through them kind of quick. But I wanted to ask if there were any charges or offense types that were discussed that ended up not being included, you know, when the project finally went forward.
I remember a robust debate about whether auto theft, so it's the penal code is 10851, unlawful taking or driving of a vehicle, should be included, and it ultimately was not included. It can be it's a wobbler offense, so it can be a felony or a misdemeanor, and there are, you know, there would certainly be a number of folks that would be eligible had it been included, but I think the Antioch PD in particular felt like that wasn't something they were willing to discuss around diversion. I don't know if Patrice remembers others when we were putting the grant together.
No, that one I do remember. Yeah, and it is primarily because it was just such a high rate of auto theft in the community, that they weren't willing to add that on as a diversionary offense.
All right. Similar question. So, Patrice, you spoke to some spirited discussion, right, as you remember it. Outside of just charges, can you sort of recall, and this is, of course, for both of you or anyone else who was involved, can you recall sort of what some of the more spirited discussions were about, or where the most work had to be done for there to be sort of a meeting of the minds in terms of how this would play out?
In terms of the project itself or specific cases?
The project itself. I wasn't, I mean, maybe when you said it, that's what you meant, is that on specific cases, there were the heated debates, but I thought maybe that was more of a larger high level discussion. So
I think that was me saying there were spirited debates around the determining the eligibility criteria, right? That list of sort of disqualifiers. This person has a prior conviction in X number of years for this crime and therefore is not eligible. So I think there was a lot of back and forth and kind of philosophical discussion around what should happen there and how limiting we wanted to be. And I think ultimately the list of charges and the 5-year requirement made it much less limiting than maybe some of the starting points we had. One of the challenges that I can distinctly remember, and I think is a challenge for any diversion program, is that really we wanted to ensure we're diverting cases that would in fact be referred to the district attorney's office and would in fact be filed, because otherwise you're not really diverting people from our criminal legal system, right? And one of the things that happened, I think, is there was incredible outreach on behalf of the service providers to lots of spaces where there are unhoused folks and encampments and different places in Antioch. And I think the teams became really well known. And the phenomenon that Patrice was kind of referring to happened is that a lot of people heard about the great work and great services and wanted to take advantage of them. And I think it put the service providers in a tough spot because of course they were out there face to face with individuals in need and wanted to meet those needs. But then, the goal of the project really needs to be, if we're going to use, funding that is to divert individuals from our system, that we're reaching that group. So I think there was a little bit of a struggle just to ensure that we were on target for that group of people and that we were truly engaging in diversion.
Right on. Sounds like once that community court sort of situation that's coming out of the DA's office kind of gets up and running, it hopefully would address some of those needs as well. Last question, I promise. I mean, unless you say something, of course, that sparks something else. Is there or has there been anything similar when it comes to I'll say youth or minors, people under the age of 18 in terms of their diversion? Because as I think about the eligibility criteria as they're laid out, I think the first one says over the age of 18 or something like that. And we know that the RJOB's charge is for youth and adults. And so thinking about as this group goes about developing a criteria, that would be one in right off the top that probably we'd want to modify. I think a lot of this would need to be modified in order to apply sort of, to the county at large as opposed to one municipal area and all of that. But that one struck me as, we want to, probably look at addressing that language so that we're inclusive of both populations, and curious if we should be looking at any similar efforts that we're doing specifically for youth.
The one thing I'd say is that, the JJCC, members of the JJCC have been working together to establish the YEEP, which is a juvenile diversion program. YEEP stands for Youth, Youth Early Intervention Project, Youth Intervention.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, it's early intervention. I think we have more fun saying YEEP than we are saying the full name. We're yeeping around here. So that's what's happening right now. And currently folks are working together. Stephanie's on that, Kira's on that, myself. Jonathan Laba from the Public Defender's Office is really convening all of that. So there's opportunities there, and there's some discussion about right now as to how the diversion process will work, and is being tested out. So that's happening. And then I would say that I would advise that, when you look at this, I wouldn't say replicate it wholesale as it is.
Right.
I would say, take a look at the structure of it, what it was intended to do and who it was intended to serve, and augment accordingly based on the population you do in fact want to support. I'll also say that when it comes to diversion, no matter what population it is, diversion alone, though it's a great thing to be able to say or address reducing recidivism in this way, that alone, again, coming from a service provider perspective, that alone is not simply enough. So when you're looking at diversion, you have to know what you're diverting these people to, and you have to know what their needs are, so that way the services, or whether they're already in existence or you understand that it needs to be beefed up to actually match their needs, is happening. Because there are those underlying needs that even created the window for an offense to be made, right, for an arrest to even happen, that needs to be addressed. And so it could be because someone was not navigated to those resources that existed, or maybe they're just simply not enough. So in talking about developing a diversion program, it always has to go hand in hand to what are you diverting them to ensure that their justice involvement is not only reduced at that specific point in time, but over time, they continue to stay further and further away from the justice system. And you will only know that you're able to do that when you have the right mechanisms in place and services in place to support that.
That was all the questions for me. Thank you.
All right, any other questions from the committee members? And any questions from or comments from the public? All right, seeing none. And for this particular agenda item, this was, and I know you mentioned, Chris, that you all, maybe it kind of came up at the last meeting. Was the thought to utilize what we've learned from this for the next agenda item, or was there anything else that needed to be done with this?
No, that was basically it, right? So in terms of how we think about moving this forward, I mean, it's not like I would ask for us to try to look at you know, all of those pages or just the, you know, appendix B like right now and say, what of this, you know, are we keeping and what are we editing and what are we changing? But the point is, you know, for that to serve as a jumping off point because so much work was already done. And basically to do everything that Patrice just laid out, right? Like that was the entire point, was to sort of look at what's been done and use it to build what we're trying to develop, even though it's a different, sort of a different endeavor, not quite as targeted, right? So some things will need to change, but wanting to have something to start from. And I think we have that, and we will need to have a few iterations probably of discussion around how exactly to move that forward, or what pieces to move forward or to highlight from it to discuss, so that we can, you know, begin to really develop whatever, you know, you guys decide from the Lead Plus effort you think needs to be replicated.
Thank you. And we just finished up a presentation on COCO Lead Plus, which I think was item number 4.
Yeah, that's right.
I have a quick question, Stephanie, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So with the understanding YEEP and now understanding this, is the goal then to run these on a parallel track? Like it seems like there's work being done in YEEP looking at diversion and coming up with the criteria that makes folks eligible. And so I know when Chris had brought up, hey, we want to focus on juveniles too. Is the goal here though to, like, at what point do we all start talking together to have one sort of county communication about it instead of having the different silos talking about the same thing? Like, I guess that's where I'm just confused of where are we trying to get to with looking at the COCO Leads Plus? Because I know with probation, we may see it a little bit different, but I mean, that's neither here nor there with the program and sort of the focus of trying to get people into it and stuff. And so I'm just trying to figure out, how do we have a much larger sort of conversation with the other players in the county to develop sort of a robust plan or so, or if that makes sense.
If I may go ahead and piggyback off of Melvin, just to clarify the 2 different juvenile programs, and Stephanie, you could talk about Restore, but Restore is the one that has the criteria similar to that of the COCO Lead Plus, it looks like. It's a case where the DA would most definitely file, but the idea is to not necessarily divert, but help the youth recognize the error of their ways and kind of mend fences, and also in a sense divert from the criminal system. Where YEEP is considered, there is no set criteria. It's just police contact of any kind. And that's for in custodies, that's for out of custodies, that's for kids that were screened with juvenile hall but rejected because the criteria doesn't fit for detention. So that just is a global thing in the juvenile division. So, and that is moving along quite well, I think. YEEP is, and Restore has been established for going on what, almost 2 years, Stephanie? So
Yeah.
just to clarify what's going on.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. I mean, I think, Melvin, to your point, I think that's one of the things that we are trying to do is figure out how can we be better coordinated and communicate with each other. And I think it's also worth noting that like there's not a one size fits all kind of program, and there's going to be different different points of the system that young people are being touched, and there's opportunity to have different programs at those different points to support young people and adults in diversion. So I think even with YEEP, it's more of an intervention process. With Restore, it's at a different process. And I think I even remember Tanisha bringing up at several other meetings, how are we getting at the young folks that are already detained or adults that are already detained. And so I think we have an opportunity to coordinate better, which we're on a path to do. It's slow, but and figure out like what are those particular needs that we need to make sure that we're identifying and those gaps that we need to identify.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to pronounce your name, so if you could say your name for me. You have your hand raised.
Satney. Thank you. I'm not sure if the public can still make a comment right now, but
Yes, you can. And how do you pronounce your name?
Imalo. And I just wanted to speak to what, just adding to what you were just saying about bringing light to gaps or inconsistencies in that diversion within Contra Costa, just through my own lived experience. I'm currently experiencing it right now. Just that it seems like there is much of it is up to the particular DA's discretion, because I've been made aware that some people with very similar charges are qualifying for diversion when many of the factors are very similar, while others are not. And these individuals, actually, their cases go in front of the same judge, but they have different DAs. And so that's just something I wanted to make people aware of, because it does allow for great inconsistencies in who is diverted and who is not.
Thank you. And are you referring to youth or adults?
Emergent adults. Emergent adults, officially adults, but still with underformed brains. So between 18 and 20.
Yeah, and I think that is a gap that we have in the county around transition age youth and the specific supports that they need.
We don't have a diversion program for transition age youth.
Thank you, DA Becton. Are there any other public comments around this particular topic? And so I think next steps, we're going to go into our next agenda topic, but to all the points that have been brought up so far, I think part of our job is to figure out how exactly we move forward and start figuring out like what are our tasks going to be, especially, I know this year is going to end pretty soon, but especially over the next year, are there specific things that we really need to focus on as a group so that we can start building out some of the recommendations that we've already talked about and figure out what's the pathway we need to take to coordinate better as a county with the different programs that are happening, what are the gaps that are needed, and are there ways to bring in more supports for the population that we're trying to serve. So moving on to our next agenda item.
Yeah, I'll take this. This could probably be really quick. It feels like now, you know, I wasn't sure exactly how the previous conversation would go, but it seems a lot less relevant, right? Because we clearly have a whole lot that we've been given to think about, and that will likely be, you know, incorporated piece by piece and discussed. But based on the conversation that we were having last month, just made some tweaks to the language that we have in our working draft in terms of the diversion guidelines here. It's in red in the agenda. I distinctly remember having a robust conversation around. So there was language that said that reviews should be done on a regular basis to ensure, or at least to discuss and to highlight the potential racial impact of any eligibility criteria, right? So in the event that a criterion is proposed, how many people of color will be impacted by, you know, this criterion, right? How many people would have been eligible before who are no longer eligible because of this particular thing? And sort of being able to suss out the impact in that way, and thus to make you know, racially equitable decisions around eligibility criteria. And the question was, well, who's going to do that, right? Like who should actually be doing that? Like, is that something that you know, an independent panel should do, which was, I think, the resounding sort of recommendation that was coming out of that discussion. So you know, changed some language there in on number 5 there to include that. And we can, I mean, probably it needs more fleshing out in terms of who should be on that independent panel and what it should look like. Also, we had talked about, I think Ellen brought up, right, that we should be doing research in terms of outcomes, not just for folks who are on diversion, but also for the people who are not, as that could inform how we develop diversion programs, find gaps, and, you know, build things in response to those gaps, or more specifically in response to those needs. So those were the primary discussion items that I recall. Just put some language in this to reflect those. Like I said, number 5 probably needs additional conversation about what that independent panel should look like. You know, and that's something that we could discuss now if folks have thoughts about it, but mainly just wanted to bring this to you guys' attention and see if there were any thoughts, any feedback about really any of this, right? Not just the red parts that were just added, right? If there are folks who haven't looked at this in a while and who are looking at it with a fresh set of eyes and have questions, now's the time to sort of discuss what's in front of you and what you think is missing, what you think should be taken out, so on and so forth.
And it's open for the community, or excuse me, the committee to share any thoughts, questions. I think one of the things that's coming up for me right now, and I'm not even sure what it could potentially look like, but it's coming up for me because I know that some of the folks from YEEP reached out to me about the data that we collect for Restore. And it's pretty robust data, but wanting to know like what those data points are so we can do the same thing for YEEP. So we're all coordinated with the different pieces of information that we're collecting. And so I'm even wondering if that's something that we could just do universally, is really start digging into what are all the data pieces that need to be collected so we can be collecting some of the same things for these different programs. Not part of the red, but that just came up for me.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I'm curious if there is like, so you have item number 3 that sort of gets into what some of this data could look like. I'm curious if there's anything that jumps out to you that would be missing that YEEP in particular might be looking for that's not represented there. Because of course that was just sort of the typical sort of Barnes Institute data like that's sort of what you have there. But if there are additional, pieces of information we should be looking for, we definitely want to add it.
Yeah, it's a few things that are on Restore, and I can't recall them right now because my mind just went blank.
Okay.
But I can definitely bring those for next time.
Okay, sounds good.
I didn't see age. Did I just miss it when I was reading?
No, you didn't miss that. And that's a good get. I think it especially when we start talking about youth, it seems a given sometimes, but nothing, even if something is a given, that should mean there's no issue with spelling it out, right?
Since I wasn't here for the last discussion, I'm wondering if there are any thoughts. I think it's great if one of the recommendations is having an independent panel. Just wondering what were some of folks' thoughts on what would be the makeup of that panel? What does that look like?
I would always say, you want representation as far as people who, or persons who are formerly incarcerated on something like that. And I also think being reflective, sort of like racially and ethnically reflective of the demographics in the population in the county, would also be a couple of places to start at least.
Any other thoughts? If anyone from the public has any thoughts on this?
I like the idea of having individuals, not just individuals who are formerly incarcerated, but individuals who have both found success in diversion programs and individuals who did not find success in diversion programs. So they have that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anyone else? So maybe one of the things, and maybe Chris, you and I can get together to talk about our next meeting. kind of in the spirit of like, where do we go from here? Figure out how we can maybe formulate our next meeting to really start talking more about that and the pathway that maybe we want to go from here. I think we have gotten a lot of information from different spaces. And so starting to, what exactly do we do with all of this information that we've gotten? And as a group, really thinking about what that looks like for us so that we can then present it to the fuller body. And maybe that could be one of the ways that we kind of start the process around even coordinating a bit more.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. I mean, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of each other over the next few weeks, which is not a complaint, mind you. Just let me make sure I put that out there. Not a complaint. I think that so I definitely think we can talk about some of those things just in terms of the information that we have now, where that information is going to go next. If there are sort of additional recommendations, because I'm just thinking based on the conversation that we've had so far, literally there's a glaring gap, right? That just came out of this discussion today, that I think we could speak directly to or potentially make a direct ask, right? In terms of like, let's move on that gap. Let's create or let's secure some sort of contract or develop a relationship with a program to serve that particular gap that we know that we have in the county. So I definitely think there are some action steps that we can take, and we can work on how best to structure those, how best to word those, and come back, assuming that we come back. I know things get tricky around mid-November, right? Folks start roasting things and putting stuff in the oven and whatnot. It gets out of hand. But yeah, I definitely think we have some good next steps to move us forward into next year.
I would volunteer to help you guys out with that. So whenever you want to meet, I'm fully in to helping come up with something for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And that will be cool with that, right? If it's just two of us.
What was that?
Violate quorum or anything.
Right.
Okay.
No, because quorum is 4, I think, for this group, 4 or 5. So two should be fine. So, and I'm not on it. So,
What? Oh, no, you're good.
Thank you, Nicole.
No, it's 5, but you're good. 2 is good.
All right, cool. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Ellen and Patrice, for the presentation. Our next meeting is November 18th, and I'm looking forward to that. Our meeting is officially adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, bye.